At E3 this year, there were several surprising announcements, but few more so than Metroid Dread, the first mainline 2D title in 19 years. Even after the 3D Metroid Prime series burst into popularity, series producer Yoshio Sakamoto always believed it had a future in 2D adventures. And so, even while he worked on several other titles in series as a senior officer at Nintendo Development, he's always been wanting to return to Metroid. Here's 5 things you need to know about Metroid Dread. Probably the most important thing about Metroid Dread is in what the title means to a lot of people. Back in 2005, journalists found internal documents that listed the game as an upcoming title for the Nintendo DS, but it didn't get announced. Cue several years of a strange back and forth with Nintendo, where it might get listed and then retracted, confirmed and then denied. And Sakamoto was put in this awkward position where he wasn't sure if he could talk about it at all. It was only recently that he could actually explain what's been going on with it in a development history video where he was very frank about his continued efforts to get the game made. One of the big things that was holding back development at the time was the technology. Lately we've been hearing quite a bit from developers about games they wanted to create but never had the tech to be able to achieve. We haven't seen much of Metroid Dread so far, but what Sakamoto was likely struggling with was the AI of the robot that hunts you down. This was something he'd tried out with Metroid Fusion, with the SAX encounters, but it's clear that Dread is aiming to be more ambitious by challenging the player to outsmart their robotic pursuer. The meaning of the title is clear. Dread is about escaping certain death and the knowledge that your enemy is both relentless and intelligent enough to track you down. In this way, Metroid Dread is more haunting than a lot of other stuff you'd see from Nintendo. Yoshio Sakamoto is a personal friend of Shigeru Miyamoto and owes him for letting him debut as a game designer at the company. But at the same time, after the release and boom of Super Mario, Sakamoto aimed to create games that Miyamoto wouldn't make. Metroid is intentionally made as everything that Mario isn't, for instance. This isn't out of a dislike for Miyamoto's games, but rather the wish to not have to compete with them. And so, stuff like WarioWare, Famicom Detective Club, and Metroid are all classics in themselves, but with a distinct feeling separate from Miyamoto's more wholesome offerings. Metroid Dread sat on a shelf for a long time after being cancelled yet again, but it got its chance after Sakamoto heard about a Spanish company that had tried to pitch a remake of Metroid Fusion. He did a bit of research and found that this company was Mercury Steam, the co-developer of Castlevania Lords of Shadow. Following on from that game, they created Mirror of Fate, a side-scrolling title, and this was the game that convinced Sakamoto to travel to Spain and ask them to help him create a remake to Metroid 2 instead. The critical success of that title gave the Metroid fans at Mercury Steam the opportunity they'd never expected, the chance to help develop the next mainline entry in the Metroid series. Throughout the awkward years in which Metroid Dread was in development hell, Sakamoto was consistent in saying that a lot of things really relied on whether fans were interested. Of course, what's the point in making something that nobody wants? Other M underperformed in sales, slowing down the output of titles within the series, and some had started to call Metroid dead. But at the same time, indie games being labelled as Metroidvania were on the rise. It was kind of weird, 2 inactive series being honoured through critically successful independent titles. So in regards to the world being ready for a new Metroid title, I feel we're more than overdue.